Hello and welcome to another episode of AAC Access All Areas. I'm Ruth Jones.
And I'm Ali Battye. And today's question is, what do we consider when choosing AAC?
Mm, yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? We talked last time about who decides, but actually, like as we talked about, it's not just there's not one person, there's lots of individuals involved in that decision. But what should all those individuals consider? Because there's lots of different elements, isn't there? There's kind of the physical side, there's the cognitive, kind of the language side, the systems around the
Mm.
individual in terms of, access and privilege and cultural things. There's so much, isn't there, that we
Mhm.
take in. Do you
Mhm.
have any particular models or any particular frameworks when you're thinking about these things you use?
I mean, the traditional sort of way of thinking about this in the AAC world is to use something called feature matching. So to sort of almost like have a spreadsheet of all of the possible AAC solutions that are out there. So if we're thinking high tech, like what are the apps? And then what are the options within those apps and what are they each good for? What do they allow? So it might be something like they have different language options. So if we're working with a child who has multiple languages in their family, it might be that some of those apps have specific languages and not others. Um, and then other traditional considerations would be like the size of the vocabulary,
Hmm.
how much vocabulary is offered, how much navigation is needed. So you've always got this sort of trade-off between if you have lots of buttons on a page, and so some vocabularies might have 120 or even
Yeah.
more buttons on a page, that will mean that there's less navigation needed between pages and there'll essentially be fewer pages on the vocabulary package. Whereas a package that has fewer buttons, like say it has 12 buttons, that will need more pages, so more
Hmm.
navigation is needed within that package. Um, and I think the sort of accepted gold standard is, or best practice is go with the maximum number of buttons on the page that that person can deal with in
Yeah.
terms of, their visual processing, and being able to scan through that number of buttons. Um, and it's probably very individual, but the packages that I tend to use, I think, probably vary between like about 20 buttons per page. And then I'm just trying to think what supercore is. Let's do a little bit of maths. It's probably like an 8 by
They do a
6.
30 and they do a
That's it, by
50.
6. They do. Oh, of course, it's in the name. It's in the name.
Yeah.
They either do Supercore 50 or Supercore 30.
Yeah, yeah. Which I think is really interesting, isn't it? Because Voco Chat, which is kind
Mm.
of more pragmatically organized by like different, what I want, and it opens up, actually has less symbols per page, doesn't it? And
Yes,
but
yes.
because it's quite intuitive, I think you don't necessarily notice the taps so much. Whereas I think
Yeah.
sometimes if you've got lots of taps to go through, lots of folders, you can feel
Mhm.
a bit like, God, is it really worth the effort? Whatever word we're
Yes,
trying to
and I have
find.
to say, like, one of the reasons I love Voco Chat is the flow is really good.
Yeah.
Like, being able to move through pages, the right links kind of come up. So, say you've got your page for places. If you go into places, then it has really easy links to like inside and
Mm,
outside places, and then shop. So it feels quite natural and intuitive to me anyway, and it's
yeah.
worth stressing. This is all very personal because what feels very natural and intuitive to one person might not to another. Um,
Mm,
which is all part of the sort of trial and error part of AAC.
yeah.
Um, we don't know what, you can make predictions, but honestly, you don't know until you try things out.
No, no, I think so. And I think that is, like vocabulary size is something part of the thing that you'd consider, isn't it? And also like you talk about different features because some apps will allow you to have a full screen but
Mm.
hide symbols. So like Prolo Quo to Go, I quite like because it's got a crescendo. So they kind of you
Mm.
can slowly introduce, but the symbols don't move. So when we're thinking about that motor planning, where the same symbol is in the same place on every page, pretty much for your core vocabulary, crescendo allows you to reduce the amount of symbols on the front screen, but they don't move. You just slowly increase the symbols that are visible as opposed to hidden. And like I know
Yeah.
on Smartbox you can hide symbols, but you kind of choose. Whereas again, I feel like that worry about is it right, is it not? Prolo
Yes, which
Crescendo's
is
kind of
why they're
taken that
hide
away.
symbols now. And I just kind of think, because we can't anticipate the words that a child will
No,
use, can we? Like they
no.
surprise us every day with the things that they say, the connections that they make, because they've got a unique brain, and who
Yeah.
knew they were thinking that at that time. So I would no longer advocate for hiding vocabulary, because I kind of I do get that visually it can look very busy if you go straight in for a full screen of symbols, and it can look clearer if you have some of those blanked out. But
Mm,
I also see that the things that children really want to explore, they'll get the motor pathways for that, regardless of whether the other buttons are
yeah,
blanked out or not. They've just like
yeah.
learnt that motor pathway, and the other buttons don't distract them because they just know where those things are. So I think that would be another example where my practice has sort of changed. And I do think, we should all be evolving in our practice, shouldn't we? I probably won't, I'm unlikely to agree 100% with myself a year from now.
Yeah.
So we're all learning and changing.
Yeah, and I
Yes.
think if there's something, isn't there, about when we think about like what are we considering, that like access to vocabulary and gatekeeping words is actually really unhelpful um because we don't know. We just don't know what people might need access to. And so I think considering something about the size of vocabulary, whether it can grow or
Mm,
change as well. You know, some of them, like if you're starting with a child at 4 or 5, the vocabulary they then want at 16, 17, 18, or at 25, 30 is going to be different. And what might those transition periods look like? And I think when you think
yes.
about feature matching and making AAC meaningful, for me, a big one is editability. I don't even know if
Yes.
that's a word, but people will know what I
It's a
mean.
good word.
It's a good word. Thanks, Sally. I think so. Because if you can't change the vocab that's there, you're stuck.
Yes.
So I think there is something to consider there. Had a little interlude for me to go and look after a poorly little one who needed a little re-snuggling. And we were just talking a little bit about vocabulary through the lifespan and feature matching for editing vocab, because you do get some packages that are quite rigid in
Yeah.
AAC. And I think that's something to consider, particularly with paper-based systems, isn't it? Is how
Mm,
are you going to edit that
mm,
vocabulary? Because for most devices, they tend to have editability.
yeah.
And for the paper-based, who has that symbol software or the software that's creating the AAC tool? And how easy is it to add vocabulary and change vocabulary? Because while we're saying don't mess with stuff, you do still change kind of the fringe vocab, don't you? Which is kind of like
Yes.
the individualized bits, and you
Yes.
also might be adding new phrases or
Mm.
particular words that crop up. I was adding this week in a therapy session. We were playing a game, Tokaboka game, where you've got to cook for
Oh yeah,
characters
I
in
love
the
that.
system. Oh, it's brilliant. It's so good. And this individual that I was working with was saying to me it was my fault that the person we were feeding in the game didn't like the steak and like hot sauce drink that they'd made for them. And you saying it's my fault? And they nodded. And I was like, right, let's add that. So we went, they're a Supercore 50 user. We went messages say, and I added your fault, because that is something
Mm.
that this individual would say to everyone all day
Yes.
because it's
Yes.
funny. And so we were able to make that quick edit. And if that had been a paper-based system, you've then got to think about how does that get edited? Because
Mhm.
paper is important and there isn't one that's better or worse. It's
Mm.
just the right tool for the person. So these are
Mm.
factors to consider if paper is
Yes.
looking like the best option for an individual. Um,
Mm.
how is that going to happen? You know, do you just scribble on the
Yes.
book at the time? And is there a day
Yes.
in the week where somebody takes all the changes and adds them and then reprints the pages? Whose job is that? Like, do they have the time to do that? The resources to print and laminate and, you know,
Mm.
all those kinds of things. So I think how easily editable a
Yes,
system
definitely.
is really
Yes.
important. In fact, I often use Light's model, you know. Um
Mm.
oh, she's a
The
researcher.
competences, AAC competence, Janice Light.
Janice. I wanted to say Janet. I was so close. And yeah, her four areas when we think about what to consider, and that sort of includes like the
Mm.
social environment and
Yes.
how somebody's showing up in that environment. Thinks about like the linguistic
Mm.
competence, so their kind of
Mm.
language, how are they using language and understanding. And I find that model quite helpful when you then
Mm.
break down those areas of considering like what are the factors.
Mm.
Um, and another one for me that's really cropped up recently is working with occupational therapy colleagues is vision,
Yeah.
both cognitive visual impairment and actual visual impairment, but also the sensory system, the visual system. And for some children, I found that paper is less visually stimulating for a quite a sensitive visual system, but also things like using Voco chat instead of Supercore because there's less colours on the symbols and there's less symbols
Yes.
on a page. So
Mm.
yeah, I think there's lots to consider, isn't there?
There is, and I think if it is possible to just get an off the shelf solution, and like you say, we would be adding to that vocabulary, but not taking anything away. So it is possible to do that in a quite a simple way. Um, if that child can access that without sort of considerations um like access needs. I mean, you can a lot of those like robust apps, you can change things like color contrast. You have to
Mm,
go into settings and just have a little bit of a look at it. So I would say make friends with the developer of that app because they are
yeah,
such useful people and so helpful. So for all of those main AAC app developers, whether it's Grid, TD Snap, Proloquo, they all have a really solid support team behind them. So if you get stuck with things, and you will, that is perfectly normal to forget how to do, how to link to a certain page or how to, import things from another package. Like you might want to add a timer or a particular layout of keyboard. Occasionally you'll want to do something quite fancy, and you can do those things. And with the help of the app developers. So
mm,
all of those big ones have a dedicated team who are there to answer questions, definitely during office hours. And I suspect some of them like round the clock. You can
yeah.
put in your question and somebody would be able to answer it really, really quickly.
Yeah, so if you are an SEM parent and your child, you know, likes to wake up at 2 a.m. and you're sort of sat there thinking, what can I do? And you think, I'll do a bit of AAC editing, you may
Mm,
well be able to get the support on the line. And I think, you know, what for me has been really lovely is when I'm working with families where they've hit an AAC wall and they're not quite sure how to do something, and they felt empowered to go and seek the answers themselves through
mm,
reaching out to developers. And I think that is a factor to consider when you're looking at it is what support do the apps offer,
mm,
because if you're doing it for yourself, unlike maybe doing it through the NHS services where you get a package of support as part of that process, if you're doing it for yourself, your support network is the people around you
mm.
and the providers of the software that you're using. And there is something quite nice in that a lot of them do offer free training and
Yes,
webinars that you
yes.
can watch to
And
upskill
their
as well.
videos are on YouTube as
Yeah.
well. So, and now in the days of AI, on things like Microsoft Edge, you can literally type in to your search bar, how do I add
Hmm.
a new button or a new page into Grid for iPad, and it will come up with the answer. I've checked this out, and it just come up with a really good answer that works. So
Hmm.
we are lucky now that we have this access to that information. I was just also going to say, Ruth, we absolutely need to back up iPad
Yeah.
based or technology based, or store the file carefully when it's paper based as
Yeah.
well. because we don't want to lose that child or adult's individualized language. So
Yeah,
again, all of those main big apps, you can back them up. Just that would be a good question for AI. How do I back up Go Loco to go? And it
yeah,
will come up with an answer to that. Just in case the worst happens, like I've known children who decided to give their iPad a wash,
yeah,
uh, or a family where they accidentally ran over the iPad backing out of the driveway. So, occasionally you do have those little accidents.
yeah,
Um, and as long as it's backed up, you can recover that package onto another
yeah.
device.
I also have a lot of users who are prolific editors, but don't necessarily have the skills to know what they're editing and how. And
Mm.
so, while for some individuals, being able to edit their own AAC is a really empowering thing because they can add the words where they want them and when they want them, most of my younger AAC users kind of have some additional learning disabilities alongside being autistic. And so necessarily might just be tapping and seeing what happens and have deleted whole vocabulary packages, and everyone goes into absolute what's going to happen. So I think a factor to consider for sure is like, can you back it up? How do you
Mm.
back it up? And kind of then making a plan for that. And actually, it's just taken me to, and I'm not sure about Android tablets and Windows
Mhm.
tablets, but with an iPad, you can set it to something called guided access, which again, if you AI, it will tell you how to do that, but it locks
Yeah.
it basically to the communication app. And there are pros and cons to that for different people. I work with some individuals who would love to use their photos and videos as part of communication, and some apps will let you do that within the AAC app, some don't. So it's kind of again just that's maybe another factor to consider. But
Mm.
if you do lock it onto guided access, you can actually grey out the edit buttons, can't you? So I kind of
Yes,
I'm quite
and you
quite
can
proud of
do it with Microsoft and Android devices, but it's more complicated.
that. Okay.
It's quite involved. Unless the technology has moved on in the last couple of years, it's
Mm,
not as straightforward as triple clicking a button to
yeah.
put it into guided access. And that's a really good point that you raise, Ruth, actually about Android devices, because I often get asked, are there good Android apps
Mm,
out there? Now, a few of the apps that I recommend are available on Android. So Weave Chat is one, and Avaz is
yeah.
another. But I would say that the iPad apps are superior, because you've got a very consistent performance across iPads, whereas Android devices, it depends on how that Android device is
Mm,
set. So on Apple, they're using the same software. It's the iOS software, and as long as you've updated to iOS 15 or above,
yeah.
all of those big apps will perform well.
Yeah.
Whereas just the picture is a bit more hazy and unpredictable with Android apps. So it is annoying that there is like one market dominator there. But
Mm.
at this present moment, I would say the Apple apps are superior.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like that, and kind of the package around Apple um feels quite consistent, doesn't it? And I think it's just made me think about actually when people say, well, why would I get a tablet at home as opposed to a dedicated device going, say, for example, to Smartbox or to Tobii Dynavox to get one of
Mhm.
their dedicated AAC devices? And there are kind of different factors to consider, aren't there? And one massive one is cost, because while
Mm.
they are much cheaper than they used to be, they're still incredibly expensive to go and get a dedicated device direct from an AAC provider. And I think for me, it's kind of reassuring families, particularly when you're thinking about AAC, that they're not really different to
Yeah.
um, getting an iPad and putting an app on it yourself. Like, you do get extra support, you get different packages of training, like they often come in more robust cases. They might be set up in a slightly different way, but really the dedicated devices are not that dissimilar to an iPad.
Yes, yes. And as a general rule of thumb, I would say that an iPad is fine if you can access the touch screen and
Yeah.
you can do things like click and swipe. But if the AAC user doesn't have that motor control with a finger press, then you would be more likely to look at that dedicated
Yeah.
device and things that go with that, like eye gaze or switch
Hmm.
access. Or, if wheelchair mountability is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And I think that's something as well, a factor to consider is actually portability and cases. I often get asked, what's the best iPad case? And,
Mhm.
I remember years ago working when, I mean, it was probably iPad 1 with Pro Low Quo to go when it first came out, like 2012, 2013.
Mm,
And we had
mm.
them in the Griffin, and somebody was like, you can drop them from space. And I was like, but can you put them in a residential specialist provision for very high support needs autistic children? And it turns out that I am yet to find a case that is indestructible. So there
Mm,
are some better ones, but I
mm.
would say that actually it's there is a preference thing. And what I also think about is always something with a strap, because what you want is
Yes.
hands-free. Like, you want
Yeah.
AAC to be portable, so it needs to be able to go everywhere,
Mhm.
but
Mm.
having a strap can be really helpful. I've recently actually supported a child, and we've just upgraded their iPad, which is something to think about, isn't it? Is kind of future proofing and having the funds to regularly update the tech.
Mm.
But we've had the Liberator case, and it's really quite nice, and it comes with different bits you can add to it. So we've been able to add the stand and add a strap, but also add a Bluetooth speaker. And
Mm.
I've got another family that use the smart box. They've got just kind of their iPad that they put grid on, but they've got the smart box case, which is quite
Mhm.
robust. But again, it's got an inbuilt speaker, and that's something to consider, because for some iPads in a noisy classroom, even
Yeah.
on full volume, they're not audible for communication partners over things. So kind of just
Yes.
thinking about, what if you are going to use device based, how
Mm.
do you increase the volume? Is the volume enough for the environments that that individual is communicating in? And is the case robust enough, and has it got easy transport around? It could just be getting a
Yes,
little
yes.
satchel bag to carry them in. But I find
Yeah.
the straps are quite nice, because then you can kind of pull it round and access it while you're on the go.
Yeah, I just try when parents say what should I buy, I just say make sure that you've got a screen protector, the
Hmm.
little film that goes over the front, and a nice rubberized case that will
Yeah,
bounce.
yeah,
So there are quite a few on the market. If you go to, our favorite online retailer, you will see several come up
yeah,
straight away. Um, and they look out for one as well that has a nice carry handle and that
yeah,
you can stand up, because you don't
yeah,
want a flat iPad, because all that you can see is the reflection
yeah.
or the ceiling. So you want one that can be angled so that you can actually see the screen.
Yeah, I think so. And they're the kind of practical factors, aren't they, when we think about it? And other things that I'd be considering is, most now will allow you to change things on the symbols in terms of the language and having additional
Mhm.
languages. So have a look into that if you're supporting, or if your family use English as an
Yes, and
additional
don't feel as
language.
though you've got to do the translation, because
No.
there are packages that are already in different language. So, for example, I know that VocoChat I happen to know it's got a Portuguese one because I asked that question this week.
Mm.
A lot of those sort of most commonly used languages in the UK, I think
Mm.
the grid are very good for. And then, Proloquo is more of a worldwide product,
Yeah.
so that might have languages that grid doesn't have.
Yeah.
Global South, it might be better for. So
Yeah.
have a look at that as well.
The
Um,
other thing I was just thinking about as well, kind of linked into that, is also like skin color of the symbols, and actually making that relatable. So, if you are supporting a black or brown AAC user, checking that you can edit their AAC so that the symbols that they're seeing are representative of
mm,
themselves.
mm,
Because I think sometimes we can forget that, and a lot of symbol packages automate to white.
yes,
So
I think they're getting better with that, because what's ideal is you want a mixture
yeah,
of those things throughout the package, don't
yeah,
you? And then specific for that person, so that
yeah,
when they're seeing themselves, it's got the right skin
yeah.
tone. But ideally, all of those packages would have built that in already so that there's that diversity
Yeah.
from the get-go. And they are getting better at that, but we still need
Yeah.
to,
It's a
yeah,
developing area, isn't it, I think, for them
yes,
in that
yes,
context.
yeah,
Um, so I think we've covered bits around culture and language. We've covered bits around access and protecting devices and the technology and the training. I mean, we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? Do you think
have.
that we've talked a bit about motor skills and kind of using our occupational therapy colleagues? And I think that is when AAC does become a bit more specialist when you're
Mm,
thinking about kind of complex access needs, you know, in terms of vision, in terms of fine motor skills and stuff. And that probably is the case. To be honest, I would say for most individuals, you've already got those specialists on board, and they're maybe in a specialist school if you're kind of looking at that level of support needs. Um, but yeah, and I feel like maybe we're kind of, I don't know, we coming to the end of it. Are there other
I
things we've
think we
probably missed
are.
off, but I think we
Yeah.
might be as we round that off. So thank you everyone for listening. It's been a whistle stop, as I say, when I
Yeah.
actually start thinking about what we've talked about, a real whistle stop, but a really, really lovely conversation. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to the next episode.
Thanks, Ruth.
Bye.